Aloha. Welcome to Condo Insider, our show about living in an association. And we've been doing this now about 2 years, and I'm one of your hosts. We have several from the industry who try to bring you interesting topics about what goes on in associations and helping board members and owners alike. I want to begin by saying I hope you're all safe with all the COVID issues. This show is being run simultaneously with the governor speaking on the latest updates. So uh, I hope some of you find this as interesting. But anyway, I was thinking about this show and what we can learn from our past and history and similar circumstances. And one thing I hear all the time is about boards and owners and service and response and and those things that can make us better communicating with our owners and our board members. And I went back to a seminar that I've given nationally on a webinar a couple of years ago. That the basic topic was, what do police negotiations and five-star customer service have in common? That's an odd topic, I have to admit, because I certainly want to say that the challenges the police force have and all of our first responders in dealing with emergencies is probably much more difficult and threatening and problematic than what we're dealing with in a condo association. So I want to acknowledge the hard work of our first responders, all of them, and even the healthcare workers today with the COVID problem. And so I don't mean any disrespect by using this comparison, but there are some very interesting lessons to be learned about the tactics used by the police when in negotiations with a perpetrator and giving five-star customer service. So I want to take you back to November 2nd, 1999, when the worst crime in Hawaiian history took place, or some say it's the worst crime. And that is when 7 men on November 2nd, 1999, were found dead at the Xerox building on North Nimitz Highway, their repair center, basically, a few miles from the downtown area, shortly after shooting began at 8 o'clock in the morning. I should point out that one person was wounded and did survive the attack, but 7 people were killed on November 2nd, 1999. And what happened in that case was it was reported that a employee, it was believed to be a man by the name of Brian Uesugi, went to the 7th floor conference room and with a 9mm pistol shot dead 7 of his fellow workers. And after he shot dead and these reports came in to the police department, he stole a company van and escaped and went away. So meanwhile, the police are closing down the downtown sales office of Xerox, not knowing what's going on. And it was reported that the Xerox van was seen in Makiki Park. And so the police department went there, the police officers, and the SWAT team went there and surrounded his vehicle. And so here, if you can imagine, here's a man that's just killed 7 of his fellow workers. Maybe he thought they were friends at one time, but he killed 7 people. He's now in a van with his 9mm pistol. He could shoot himself or he could shoot somebody else. And the police had the challenging role of getting him to surrender. Now, you can see that's a challenging task and a lot of responsibility on it. You don't want anybody else hurt, and you certainly would like to have him surrender, but the circumstances were very, very stressful, to say the least. But after 5 hours of negotiation, they got him to surrender. And they got him to put down his weapon and come out. And so what do you think I guess we're on slide, it should be on slide 2 right now. So the rest came after the police had spent 12 hours negotiating as he sat in that residential area in Makiki Heights. And he surrendered peacefully and emerged. So the question is, what was the one thing that got him to surrender? And the third slide will give you the answer. A big gulp. Now, I know you're asking yourself the question, what do you mean a big gulp? Well, what happened was, they assign a negotiator, and he has a role and a methodology he uses, and it begins with rebuilding rapport with the suspect. And during these discussions, these hours-long discussions and chats, at one point in time, Mr. Uesugi said, "Boy, I wish I had a big gulp." And the negotiator grasped on that moment and said, "I'd like a big gulp too. Why don't you put down your gun, get out of the car, and I will take you for a big gulp." And that's exactly what Brian Uesugi did. So next slide, please. Essentially, after 5 hours of negotiating, when he said, "I wish he'd have a big gulp," and the negotiator said, "Yeah, let's go do that. I'll get you a big gulp. We'll go together." Brian's next words were, Mr. Sugi's next words were, "Would you do that for me?" And the negotiator said, "Yes." And at that moment, he put down the gun and got out of the van and was arrested. And what do you think the negotiator did? He took him to 7-Eleven. He bought him a big gulp. They sat there and talked for 15 or 20 minutes. And then they was handcuffed and taken to jail. And ultimately, he was tried and convicted of 7 murders and 1 attempted murder, and was sentenced to a life sentence with no possibility of parole. Very serious matter, but successful from the negotiator and the police department's point of view, because they got him to surrender without any harm in doing that. So let's just briefly, again, I want to again say that this is certainly a much bigger challenge than we find in the condo association business. But let's look at the techniques that he used with regard to that. But what the negotiator basically looks at is several, but some specific things. The number one rule of a negotiator is kind of like time is on your side. You want that person to talk and talk, get it off their chest. When emotions are high, logic is low. You want to have that person spend as much time as you can, letting them kind of get out of the high emotion to the low emotion by continuing to talk and talk and talk. So negotiators are taught to not rush to get a conclusion. Let that person continue to talk until he gets to a level that is lower, when logic is higher, to try to get a successful solution. The other thing is they're taught not to use the word no. They want that person to talk with them, and they want them to develop a rapport by relating to them. So when he would be venting about, "Oh, I felt so bad that my workers were treating me," they'd be saying things like, "Well, I understand how you feel. Sometimes I feel that way too." Because what they're trying to do is create a relationship under a very difficult circumstance and situation that would be one that's conducive to try to negotiate a resolution. And so in this particular case, the negotiator spent 5 hours talking to Mr. Uesugi about lots of topics, letting time heal to the extent that the high emotions would eventually get lower. And then number 2, trying to build a rapport by saying things, "Well, I understand how you feel. I sometimes feel that way too." The negotiator is not saying that, "Well, I agree with what you did," but he's still setting a relationship to the person that they begin to feel that they can talk to that person, and that person can understand, or the negotiator understands how that person is feeling. And at some point in time, it cracked. Mr. Uesugi said, "Boy, I wish I had a big gulp." He'd been sitting in the sun and in the air conditioning, non-air conditioned van for 5 hours, and he was getting hot and sweaty. And starting to realize his remorse and wanted something to drink. He said, boy, I wish I had a big gulp. And so the negotiator did what he should and saying, boy, I wish I had a big gulp too. I'm really thirsty for a big gulp. I like the 7-Eleven big gulp. Why don't we go get one together? And Mr. Usugi said, would you do that for me? Think of the circumstances of getting a murderer to suddenly say that he felt such a rapport with the negotiator. Would you do that for me? You'd get me a big gulp and take me for a big gulp? And the negotiator said yes, and he surrendered. And what's interesting about that is the negotiator then took him as promised to take and get a big gulp. And while they had the big gulp, they talked, and again, trying to keep the emotions low. And at the same time, he wanted to live up to his promises, because that's one thing they always do, is when they make a promise, they live up to their promises. And that's kind of one of the key indicators on doing that. So on that note, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about how this relates to 5-star customer satisfaction and how to deal with any problem in your own life, as well as ones with owners and board members in a condo association. So we'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Lillian Cumik, host of Lillian's Vegan World, the show where we talk about veganism and the plant-based diet, located in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm a vegan chef and cooking instructor, and I have lots of information to share with you about how awesome this plant-based diet is. So do tune in every second Thursday from 1 p.m. Aloha.
Well, we're back to Condo Insider, talking about the worst crime in Hawaii history. And again, a shout out to all of our first responders for the things they do for us. They certainly have a difficult job, and I know we're going through some challenging times nationally regarding the role of first responders at times. But having been a graduate now of the 32nd class of the Honolulu Citizens Police Academy, where I spent 13 weeks learning what police officer training is like, and going through various situations where they teach you how to respond, I can tell you it's a very, very difficult job. And even though I'm not condoning some of the things we've seen lately on the news, I certainly would tell you being a police officer or a first responder is a very difficult job. And me relating this to customer service is not meant as a disrespect for their hard work. So let's take the next slide and just tell you that, I've been dealing with condos and people and problems and disagreements for a long time. I've been in the industry 25 years. And we look at a dissatisfied client, a board member, an owner, maybe it's between the management company and the board, or between an owner and the board, or the owner and the management company, and you have someone who's really unhappy. It's a different type of crisis, but it is something that can really affect how people feel and how they react to the situation. And there's essentially a few simple tips that I have used in this seminar to tell you, and it follows the kind of negotiating strategy of police departments and how to deal with that. And let's look at the next slide, which talks about the basic steps to client satisfaction. And it begins with the first one is be an active listener. Just like we learned in the case I gave you a minute ago, they were not in a rush to come to a conclusion. They wanted that person on the other end of the phone or at the meeting to feel like you were giving them 100% of their attention. And you wanted to be a person listening and trying to get them to get it off their chest, all off their chest. And to be, if you're on the phone, to be doing email or working on something else and kind of being passive doesn't send the right message. People can tell when you're on the phone whether you're paying attention or not. So you need to put everything aside and say, number one, I'm going to be an active listener to what the concerns are. Then number two, to the extent possible, you're going to empathize with them to develop rapport. Well, I understand how you'd feel if that happened to me. I might feel the same way. Now, they may not be telling you exactly what happened and giving you the whole story. You can certainly be sending messages to them that, I understand how you might feel that way. I'm here to help you solve it. I'm here to help you fix it. And you, by empathizing with them at the right time, so you're giving them enough time to get it off their chest, you're kind of empathizing with them. And then you want to try to offer solutions. And if you can, give them something extra, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But the word you try to avoid is no. No, we won't do that. It's against our company policy. There's ways you can express company policy in positive ways, or board policy, I should say, in positive ways, or why you need to approach it differently in positive ways without actually physically using the word no. Because no is a negative. It creates a barrier between communication, and you want to try to be able to offer them solutions. And then one of the key things is, and this is probably a little more advanced for some of you, if you can identify their behavior style. When you look at people, they kind of fall into 4 categories of behavior style. There's the ones who like to get to the point fast. They don't want any nonsense or BS. This is the problem. I want to know what's going on. And that's how you should deal with it. Then you have the schmoozers. Well, I got a problem, but how's your kids today? And, the weather's nice. Wish I could go surfing. And, where do you surf? And they like to schmooze versus get to the point right away. And then you have people that you're going to give them a solution that needs considerable time to think. So you need to not rush them to give you an answer right at that moment. You need to realize by their communication style, well, I need to think about that. And you need to know that you're going to adjust what you say based on the type of personality, behavior style they have. And then there's ones that they want you to feel like they're their best friend, and so the fourth one, the behavior high style, you have to kind of look at how they're communicating with you and see if they want you to get right to the point fast to give an answer, whether they want to talk stories, schmooze a little bit, whether you're going to be able to get them to give you a answer immediately or not give them an answer immediately. And these are kind of critical to understanding the steps to customer satisfaction. Now, let me tell you a true story. I was at my desk, and this is a problem between an owner and a management company. And I get a phone call, and I pick it up. Hello? And the first words out of the person's mouth are, I'm going to sue you. Well, I hear that probably once a week in the condo business. Everybody likes to threaten they're going to sue somebody, like it's going to get our attention more. But the reality was, it certainly told me, well, I think this guy's got a problem. So I said, sir, I'm so sorry to hear that. What's your problem? He said, I want you to know 3 years ago, I had $300 on my ledger. And it took me 6 months to get your company to get it off. It wasn't supposed to be there. And it went away and took me 6 months to get it done. And you know what happened yesterday? The $300 appeared on my ledger again. And that shouldn't have happened. You shouldn't have put it back on. And I'm going to sue you for your bad accounting. Meanwhile, I had gotten his name in the project. And so I pulled up his ledger on the computer. And I could see that the $300 was a new charge that everybody had a road assessment. So I jumped right in and say, well, Can't you read? Can you get your mail? Didn't you see you already had it? It's not the same thing. Of course not. Doesn't make any sense to develop a relationship. I said, well, tell me more about that. Your $300. And how was it solved? Was it solved then? Yeah, is it correct? You know, and developed, I certainly would feel the same way if I had that problem and it came back a second time, 2 years later, I'd feel the same way. Can I ask you a question? Sure. Are you aware there was a road assessment January 1 of $300 for all the unit owners? There's silence on the phone. I wait a few seconds. Hello, are you still there? He says, I'm sorry. I forgot about that. So what do you think I said? I said, you know what? I forget about things all the time. I wouldn't feel bad about that at all whatsoever. You know, let me try to help you with this. First of all, I can see you have a good payment record, so I'm going to waive the late fee because you didn't pay the $300. But number two, if you'd like, I'll help you right now. Go online and you can make the payment. Well, I'm a senior citizen and I don't have a computer that I can use successfully, so I don't do that kind of thing. Well, that's okay. Why don't I send you an envelope with a prepaid stamp on it, and you can mail that check to me, to my personal attention, and I'll make sure it gets applied immediately to your account and that there's no late fee. And he said, no, that's okay. I know what to do now. I appreciate everything you did and what you said. I apologize. No reason to apologize. If you can see, the technique I used was A, let him talk. B, I empathize with him. But then I offered not just a solution, but I offered to go the extra mile. I offered to go the extra mile and say, let me mail you an envelope with a stamp on it. Let me help you go online to solve the problem. And then I made him not feel bad, hopefully, that I told him that sometimes I make mistakes. So I developed a relationship with that client. So he felt good about it. In fact, he did. He wrote a letter to the president, which was me, but he didn't know that, I don't think. But anyway, the reality of it is when you have circumstances, you just have to take your time, let people talk, empathize with them, avoid the word no, and look for solutions. And when you can do a solution, you can offer a little extra, you're going to be a lot better off in doing customer service. Now, I have another slide that talks about some practical points that I have found to be the key things of what really angers people when they're dealing on a customer service problem. The first is not being able to find anybody. We get these phones with all these buttons and numbers and call forwarding and voicemail. You want to try to avoid phone delays and have within your approach a fast and easy way to get a hold of somebody. You have a person who is writing the board a letter and they're upset. Have the management company call them, invite them to the board for an executive session. Acknowledge the letter. You know, avoid, if they call you on the phone, delays and putting them on hold. And certainly what you don't want to do is be working on something else while you're dealing with that customer. That's again back to listening actively and giving him your full attention. So, and you need to look at the process you have and how you're going to deal with the complaint to make sure that that person doesn't get all this tied down into delays and voicemails and things, except an exception. And if you have a voicemail, the rule of thumb ought to be return it the same day. I know it's difficult for some of you because you have lots of other things in your lives, but the most important thing you can do is acknowledge it, even if you don't have the answer. Even if you're going to say, I'll get you an answer, but I want to acknowledge receiving your call, is better than just letting the thing linger and the guy thinks, oh, there we go. They don't care. They're not going to make it. Second thing is when you're dealing with something, make only promises you can keep. In the case of the police, they offered a big gulp. In the case of this, if you say, I'll get back to you in a week, make a note and get back to them in a week. You may be saying a week from now, I'm still researching some of the information. I don't have all the answers. I need another week. But if you make a promise, keep the promise. If you promise them information or promise to get back to them, you've got to do that to maintain 5-star customer service. And the other thing is, it may not even be in this case, my example wasn't the management company's fault. Be helpful even if there's not an immediate profit. The fact that I spent a lot more time on that owner who had what he thought was a $300 improper assessment, I was extremely helpful. Even though there was no immediate return, I had a lot more things to do, because the long run benefit of that is far more positive and more profitable to me in the long run of having a relationship with that customer. I used to say to management company employees all the time that they may be next year's board director. So be careful. Okay, next slide real quick, we're running on to 3 minutes. You're communicating with them, always spell their name correctly, obvious, know you care, always take the extra step when you can, always throw in something extra. And then you got to train your employees or your board members. You've got to construct within yourselves a method that you take seriously, customer service, and you put all the energy and effort into giving them a satisfactory solution. So we're down to our final minute. And so I wanted to summarize by saying that, we appreciate all the work of our first responders. You can make your life a lot easier if you just listen actively, develop a rapport, find solutions, and be helpful in the work you do with customer service. And you'll find it goes a long way in having a wonderful community and solving problems and keeping everybody's emotions low and having a happy place to live. On that note, we hope to see you next week at Condo Insider. We thank you for tuning in, and aloha.